Ferdinand Oyono's Houseboy, originally published in French as Une vie de boy, 1956, is a satirical, poignant, and politically charged novel that critiques the brutal absurdities of colonialism in French-ruled Cameroon. Told through the diary entries of a young African boy, the novel reveals how colonial structures dehumanize, exploit, and manipulate the colonized under the guise of civilization and benevolence. Oyono, a Cameroonian diplomat and writer, presents a unique narrative style that blends humor, irony, and tragedy to explore themes of colonial oppression, identity crisis, cultural conflict, and hypocrisy. Despite its brevity, Houseboy stands as a seminal text in African literature for its sharp critique of European imperialism and its innovative use of a diary format, which gives voice to the often silenced African perspective. Narrative frame. The novel begins with an unnamed narrator, a colonial administrator, who discovers the diary of Tundi, a young African man who has recently died in a hospital. The rest of the novel consists of Tundi's diary entries, recounting his life experiences under colonial rule and leading up to his untimely and mysterious death. Tundi's early life and conversion. Tundi, the protagonist, is a young boy from a rural Cameroonian village. After a quarrel with his father, he runs away from home and finds refuge with Father Gilbert, a French Catholic missionary. Tundi becomes the priest's houseboy and is soon captivated by Western religion and education. He adopts the Christian faith wholeheartedly and is seen by locals as a white man's boy. Tundi's early diary entries reflect naive admiration for the colonial system. He is eager to please, convinced of the superiority of European culture, and believes that aligning himself with Europeans is a path to progress and meaning. However, Father Gilbert's sudden death marks a turning point in Tundi's life. He is assigned to a new colonial commandant, a French official, and becomes his houseboy, a position that changes his life irreversibly. Life with the commandant. The commandant initially treats Tundi with distant civility, and Tundi strives to serve him loyally. However, the commandant's wife arrives from France, and Tundi's life begins to unravel. Madame is cold, racist, and hostile toward Africans. She treats Tundi and other locals with disdain and suspicion. Tundi becomes an unwilling observer of the commandant's household dysfunction. Madame begins an affair with M. Moreau, a brutal colonial officer, and the affair becomes an open secret. Tundi's awareness of this scandal places him in a dangerous position, as both Madame and M. Moreau come to see him as a threat to their reputations. Betrayal and decline. Tundi is eventually accused of theft, framed by M. Moreau and Madame in an attempt to remove him. Despite his innocence, he is arrested and tortured by colonial police. He becomes the victim of systemic injustice, a pawn in the colonizers' games of power and ego. His loyalty, honesty, and innocence offer no protection in a system built on oppression and racial hierarchy. After being severely beaten and humiliated, Tundi escapes from prison, wounded and disillusioned. He dies shortly afterward, his body broken and his spirit shattered. The diary ends shortly before his death, leaving the final lines heavy with tragedy and irony. Major characters. Tundi Ondua, the young African protagonist whose diary recounts his journey from naivete to disillusionment under colonial rule. He represents the colonized subject, eager to belong, yet constantly degraded. Father Gilbert, a kind-hearted French missionary who mentors Tundi early on. His death symbolizes the end of Tundi's idealism. The commandant, a French colonial administrator who sees Africans as tools of service. He is both indifferent and complicit in their exploitation. Madame, the commandant's wife, whose cruelty and hypocrisy epitomize the moral corruption of colonial elites. M. Moreau, a sadistic colonial officer and Madame's lover. He uses violence and intimidation to enforce colonial authority. Themes and analysis. 1. Colonialism and hypocrisy. At its core, Houseboy is a scathing indictment of colonial hypocrisy. The French colonizers claimed to bring civilization, religion, and order to Africa, yet their actions reveal violence, racism, immorality, and corruption. The missionaries preach love and salvation, while colonial officials torture, exploit, and demean the people they rule. Madame and M. Moreau exemplify this hypocrisy. Madame presents herself as virtuous, yet she engages in adultery and cruelty. M. Moreau is a guardian of order, but uses torture as a tool of control. Through Tundi's eyes, Oyono exposes how colonialism is not a civilizing mission, but a system of domination and degradation. 2. Loss of identity and cultural displacement. Tundi undergoes a profound identity crisis. By embracing Christianity and Western culture, he distances himself from his African roots. He adopts a foreign name, internalizes colonial values, and seeks approval from Europeans. However, the colonizers never accept him as an equal. To them, he remains a boy, a servant, inferior, and expendable. When he is no longer useful or becomes inconvenient, he is discarded. Oyono uses Tundi's life to explore how colonialism destroys indigenous identity and offers no viable substitute. The colonized subject is trapped between worlds, alienated from both his own people and the colonizers who reject him. 3. Innocence and disillusionment. The narrative follows Tundi's fall from innocence. At the beginning, he is hopeful, trusting, and even admiring of his European employers. His diary is filled with wonder and idealism. As the story progresses, these illusions are shattered. Tundi learns that colonial power is maintained through fear, violence, and manipulation. His suffering marks the death of innocence and the birth of political consciousness. His journey becomes a metaphor for the broader African awakening to the brutal reality of colonization. 4. Satire and irony. Oyono's use of satire is central to the novel's impact. Tundi's naive tone often highlights the absurdity and cruelty of colonial practices. The reader is meant to see the irony between what Tundi believes and what is actually happening. For example, Tundi describes colonial officials with admiration, even as their actions contradict their words. The diary format, which relies on Tundi's voice, creates a double layer of meaning. The reader understands what Tundi cannot yet see, and this gap generates irony and critique. 5. Violence and injustice. The colonial system is upheld by institutionalized violence. Tundi's eventual torture and death are not anomalies but consequences of a structure that uses fear to suppress resistance. The novel lays bare how the law, police, and bureaucracy work not to protect the innocent but to protect the colonizers. Tundi's ordeal reflects the denial of justice and humanity to colonized peoples. His suffering is emblematic of the thousands whose voices were silenced under empire. 6. Religion as a colonial tool. Christianity, initially embraced by Tundi, is depicted as a tool of control. While Father Gilbert seems sincere, the Church ultimately functions to pacify Africans, encouraging submission and self-denial. Tundi's blind faith in Christian morality makes him vulnerable. He expects love and justice but encounters cruelty and betrayal. Oyono critiques how religion is used not to uplift the colonized, but to justify and mask their subjugation. Style and narrative technique. Oyono's use of the diary format is a powerful literary choice. It grants intimacy to Tundi's voice while maintaining narrative distance. Readers witness his thoughts, feelings, and confusion in real time, creating sympathy and dramatic irony. The language is simple, conversational, and accessible, but beneath this lies a layer of sharp critique and philosophical insight. The narrative is unflinching yet subtle, allowing readers to grasp the horror of colonialism through a personal lens. Symbolism. The house represents colonial structures of power, appearing orderly but built on repression and secrets. The gun, a symbol of colonial authority and violence, often carried by Mro, reinforcing dominance. Tundi's diary, a metaphor for the silenced African voice that reclaims its narrative, even in death. Conclusion. Ferdinand Oyono's Houseboy is a masterpiece of African anti-colonial literature, offering a profound, human, and ironic exploration of life under empire. Through Tundi's tragic journey from idealism to disillusionment, Oyono critiques the moral bankruptcy, hypocrisy, and violence of colonialism. By giving voice to a young African houseboy, someone normally marginalized and unheard, Oyono reclaims narrative power. The novel is not just a story of colonial Cameroon. It is a universal indictment of systems that exploit, deceive, and dehumanize. Even in its brevity, Houseboy delivers a lasting message. That beneath the surface of civilization lies an empire built on brutality, and the first step to freedom is recognizing the truth hidden in plain sight.